In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the Baby Jewel Loom designed by Julianna Avelar to create a really fun and easy pendant. The Baby Jewel Loom is a smaller version of the full-scale Jewel Loom and works a little bit differently, but it still has 2 buttons on the back to secure your warp material and ridges on either side. The difference here in the Baby Jewel Loom is that there is no bar here. The tension for the warp threads is static, and that's okay because with its smaller frame, you don't need the bar in the middle to create that tension. The Baby Jewel Loom is great for making pendants. You can also make bracelets. This area here is about 6 inches, or you can use smaller pieces and then weave them together for a larger piece. For the project today, I'm going to use 26 gauge artistic wire and size 6 seed beads. To get started, you want to work off of the spool of 26 gauge wire and wrap the end of the wire around one of the back buttons twice to secure it. Next, pull the wire up and around the top of the loom, letting that wire settle in between 2 of the grooves on one side. Then pull that wire across to the other side. Let it line up with the grooves on the other side and wrap it around the button on the back. Continue wrapping around and settling the wire into the grooves until you have as many warp threads as you need for your project. Today's project, I'm going to be using 10 warp threads, which will give me 9 spaces for beads. As you're wrapping your warp wires, you want to keep a gentle tension without pulling too tight, but you also don't want it to be loose so that there are gaps in your wire. When you're done warping with your wire, secure the end around the back button by wrapping around a couple of times and snip it off. You can take a nylon jaw pliers and run it very gently over those wires to straighten them out in case they got a little kinked or out of shape during the warping process. To get started looming, you'll cut off a length about 4 feet of 26 gauge artistic wire and string on 9 beads. You'll always want to count the number of spaces and use that number of beads for your weave. After you have your beads strung up, place that wire underneath the warp wires of the jewel loom. You want the small tail of the wire pointing to the right and the longer end of the wire pointing out to the left. Next, guide the beads with your index finger so that one bead nestles in between each of those warp wires and hold them in place with your index finger. Next, carefully and gently thread the 26 gauge wire back through the row of beads from left to right. This creates the weft portion of the weave. You want to make sure that the wire from below is on top of each of the warp wires as you're bringing it through. The first row is always the hardest row, but after you get going, all of the beads should line up nicely into place. A good tip here is to take a curved chain nose plier and gently pull that wire through. At this point here, I like to bend my tail back and very gently tighten this loop of wire up. Now I'm ready for my second row. So again, I'll pick up 9 beads, place those beads underneath the warp wires, and push them up into place with my index finger. Now here you want to be careful that this little loop does not get too big. So very gently pull that tight and work those beads into place. Now holding them in place with your index finger, and sometimes if it's easier you can use your thumb as well. Take your weft wire and thread it back through those beads. Once again, making sure that it is through each of the beads and resting on top of the wire. I like to use my fingers to hold everything in place as I'm pulling, because then I can get the wire nice and tight. Once again here, I want that loop to tighten up against the work wire, so I'll hold the beads and very gently pull it tight. Continue adding beads one row at a time until you're finished with your design. When you're finished your pattern, carefully snip the warp wires free from both sides of the jewel loom. Make sure you leave these wires as long as possible because we're going to be using them for our next step. From here, there are of course several different ways that you can finish off your design, but I like creating little picots of beads on both of the sides, then turning some wrapped loops so that I can attach a chain at the top and some dangles off of the bottom. Before I start making my picots, what I like to do is weave these tails of wire out of the way. To weave the tails of the wire out of the way, I like to do a whip stitch down the side of my piece. After I weave in my tail from the top, I can snip that off and do the same with the bottom. If I can thread it in between those loops, I will, but if there isn't enough room, that's okay too. And once I get up to where my other wire is, I'll go ahead and snip that off as well. Now you want to be careful because until these warp threads are secure, they actually will move in between these beads. And the last thing you want to do at this point is pull one out, because then your loomed piece is pretty much ruined and you'll have to start over at the very beginning. So to start making the picots, what I'll do is I will move my wire into groups. I have 3 wires here, 4 wires here, and 2 wires here. The first group I'm going to work with is this middle group of 4 here. So I'll move 2 wires to one side and 2 wires to the other. I'm going to put one size 8 seed bead over these 2 wires and one size 8 seed bead over these 2 wires. So I'll put all 4 of those wires together now and slide one size 8 seed bead over top and push that down into place. Depending on how many wires you started out with, that will depend on how you do your picots here. But a general rule is you want to do groups of 3 or more if that suits your fancy. But what I'm doing is I'm just bringing these together so that I can form a loop. And again, be really careful here that you don't pull these wires out so that they come out the other side. Now I'm ready to make a wrapped loop with these 3 wires. So using the round nose pliers, I'll very gently and carefully make a wrapped loop with all of the wires. And since I'm doing all of the wires together, I just want to take my time and get that wrap as tight and as neat as I can. And use my chain nose pliers to put everything down in place. So now on either side I have 3 wires each. So I just need to put one bead on the leftmost wire, one bead on the rightmost wire, and then bring those together and put one bead over all 3 wires. I'll use that same technique to make a wrapped loop here. You want to make sure that all of your loops will be going the same way. Double check your loops and make sure everything looks good, and then you're ready to do the other side. To finish the other side, make your picots and your loops the same as on the first side. Now my pendant is finished. I have woven in the ends. I have added some picots with the extra warp wires and added loops on each of the ends so I can hang it from a chain or a beaded design. The loops at the bottom are a great way to use jump rings or chain to add even more dangles to your loomed design.